Geesh. My name is Michelle Demmert. My Tlingit name is Jackathot. I am Kahit Satan from the Mansfoot clan, the Eagle Moiety. My father was the late Larry Demmert from Clewak, and my mother is Sharon Demmert. I'm Tlingit, Irish, German, and Scottish, and I'm very honored to be here. And before jumping in, I just want to say thank you for that reminder to go out and take care of ourselves. Okpik, I took my puppies out for a short, quick watering session, and there was a juvenile eagle that flew right next to us. And so it was my eagle brother telling me today was going to be a good day. And we have to be aware of those signals from the universe. And it always gives me goosebumps because I firmly believe in the spiritual world, and that was just a tremendous sign. So goodness sheesh.
Shemai, and good afternoon. My name is Alex Cleghorn, and I was born here in Anchorage, though I grew up mostly in Fairbanks. My dad's side of the family is from Kodiak, and so I'm Sukpiak. I'm a tribal citizen at Dagdignac, also known as Woody Island. And I serve my community with a few hats. I serve on the tribal council. I also serve on our regional corporation, Board Kunyag. My mom's side of the family is from Dillingham, though Gusuk, not native, not Yupik. And I've been a tribal attorney for coming on 20 years, which as I get a little older is harder to say. I'm just so grateful to get to be here today to talk with you all and share some of the work that the working group is doing, because I think it's important to not just recognize the gravity and the sadness that we have on this issue, but to hear about the work that we're doing, that we are trying to make it better and trying to respond and serve our people and make the systems that are supposed to serve us better. So thank you.
Oh, it's so great to be here with all of you and all of the panelists, just listening. And it's such it's a really hard topic to work on, but I just want to first say you make it all easier to do it together and to do it in community and with all of our community members out there. We just uplift each other, and it's hard work that we come into this work. So my name is Kendra Kloster, the Executive Director of Native Peoples Action and Native Peoples Action Community Fund. I was born and raised down in Southeast Alaska, so Wrangell, Juneau area. From my mother's side, I'm Tlingit, Raven, Kiksati, and my dad's family grew up and are from Yakima, Washington. We're Irish and German. And so Michelle, I just learned something that we share a lot of heritage here. Always learning something new about each other. I love it. I come to this work so much as a mama. I have a couple kiddos, and we often have our kiddos in spaces together when it's not COVID time. And I just really think about all these different hats that I might wear, where I've served on, as Okpik mentioned, the MMIP council that was recently created, in addition to the Public Safety Advisory Commission, where Emily and Okpik are there with me as well, the Russian Jack Community Council, but do all of this work within our community and with the backing of everybody. So couldn't be in these spaces without all of you, without that support, and really trying to make change on multiple different levels and in multiple different spaces of bringing this information forward. So just really good to be here again.
Thank you. And Kendra, I don't know what year it was, but I hadn't known Kendra before these orgs, before even some of these orgs were started, and before I worked at any of them, or we knew some of us even knew each other. Kendra had reached out to me as a community member, and she had said, "Hey, I heard you're doing something on MMIW. You want to have coffee?" I was like, "Yeah." And so we just clicked and we shared about all of this work, and we just decided to keep meeting every week from there on. And so it just started with 2 people connecting, and then we built our orgs into it, and then found these amazing partners. And so I just want to take that moment to recognize that the families and all of you, our communities, are the ones that really called attention to this issue, that uplifted us, and then we're able to build off of it. And it feels like that was just yesterday, and that so much has been done, but we have so much more to do. So we'll dive into our panel and talk about some of that. So I wanted to start with Michelle. Before we jump into all of this that we're going to be sharing, we thought it might be useful to kind of have a context of legal history that helps frame the work for folks who have joined us in the audience who might not be as familiar. So before we jump into things like acts and all of these things, we thought that would be useful. So if you wouldn't mind sharing Cliff Notes style, some of the legal history that can start us off for this conversation, that'd be great.
Thank you, Alpic. I really value tremendously our partnership with the MMIWG2S work group. It's wonderful to have colleagues such as all of you and others who are not on the screen right now, because we do have different perspectives and we do have different histories that really lend us to finding the solutions. So today, I really appreciate your time today. As a law and policy person, I want to focus on this area. I think that it's important to understand the complicated legal history that Alaska has. It's unparalleled. And as a result of it, it's really jeopardized our safety in our communities. It's really resulted in disproportionate violence against our women and children. And there's just, a number of things that that I think is really important to understand, so we can understand the challenges and look for solutions. So I'm going to take you back in time. So, and whether you agree with the history or not, I'm just going to be factual based on what's in the books and not giving any commentary about some of it. So with that being said, the combined impact of Public Law 280, the Supreme Court's decision in Venati, and the timing of the historical events in Alaska have left our communities dependent on the state of Alaska for public safety and justice. It is in this context that we are where we are today, with one of the highest rates of murder, missing persons, and violence against our women and children. So with that being said, I'm going to give you a short primer on Alaska Native law. The Alaska Territory was purchased by the United States from Russia in 1867. 4 short years later, Congress prohibited the president from treating with tribal governments. Treaties are historical documents that are an important tool of agreements between one government to another. Treaties between individual sovereign American Indian tribes and the U.S. were negotiated to establish land borders, payments, and other rights and responsibilities. We have no treaties. That is one very important tool. And you think about what was going on in that period of time. It was just right after the Civil War. And so the rest of the country, they weren't focused on Alaska at all. And they just didn't want the president to treat with any more Indian tribes. So Alaska was a territory for almost a century before becoming a state during a time called the Termination Era. This was a time in federal Indian policy between the mid-1940s to mid-1960s in which the federal government's policy was to terminate Indian tribes. And there are a number of tribes in the nation that have actually been terminated. Some of those are working on restoration of their status, but nonetheless, that was a very dark period of time. And that's when the state of Alaska was brought into the Union, and some significant issues resulted for us. So the policy, while it was widely repudiated, still was the one in effect. And there's a law called Public Law 280, which was enacted during the termination era and transferred to certain states federal criminal jurisdiction over Indians living on tribal lands. Before Public Law 280 was enacted, the federal and tribal governments shared jurisdiction exclusive of the states. So the states had no jurisdiction prior to that time, almost all civil and criminal matters. So prior to that time, the federal government and Indian tribes had concurrent jurisdiction. Post Public Law 280, the state and Indian tribes have concurrent jurisdiction. So that was, Public Law 280 was extended to us a month after Alaska became a state, and we're considered one of the 6 mandatory states, meaning that there's 5 other states in which tribes located in those states also are subject to Public Law 280. So at this time of statehood, Alaska had several executive order reservations and native town sites, which were set aside for the benefit and use of Indians or Eskimos. In the 1960s, land rights became a primary issue in Alaska. Why? Discovery of oil and all the natural resources, and the federal government wanted to end any question of land status for natives and gain access to those rich oil reserves. So the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act came to at the tail end of the termination era. ANJC created a new and novel approach to tribal land tenure. There's no other ANJC-like act for the other tribes in the nation. Rather than recognize sovereign tribal lands, ANJC created for-profit corporations and transferred tribal lands in fee to these entities to manage more than 40 million acres of land. ANJC divided the state into 12 regional corporations and over 200 village corporations that would identify with their regional corporation. So many of these villages had corresponding tribal village governments, but with the passage of ANJC, no meaningful or recognized land base. So, and I really appreciate you hanging in there with me. I'm going to get to my point very soon. Following the enactment of ANJC, several decades of confusion about the status and territorial authority of Alaska tribal governments ensued. Ultimately, the tribal status of Alaska Natives was confirmed, but the jurisdiction of tribes was severely limited by the Alaska Native Village, Alaska versus the Native Village of Venati, which was a tax case, of course. And in that case, the U.S. Supreme Court held that lands transferred by ANJC do not meet the definition of Indian country under federal Indian law. And Indian country is a term, a legal term that defines jurisdiction. And so as a practical matter, we had jurisdiction, we were governments, we were sovereigns, but we had no land, essentially. And so, and how do you legislate? You usually have a defined territory in order to legislate and make laws and that sort of thing. So in 2013, there was a Violence Against Women Act was passed, and it expanded inherent jurisdiction of a tribe to the corresponding Indian country. But in Alaska, without Indian country, how could we take advantage of that act? So nearly 1/2 of the tribes in the nation were unable to take advantage of the protections that VAWA 2013 brought. So there was a recent reauthorization, and I like to call that VAWA 2022, and that changes all that. I believe Alex will be talking more about it. But I think it's really important to understand how we got to where we are today and why there's so much confusion, why there's a lack of resources, why there is just, it's created some really dangerous situations. A week doesn't go by where I'm called and someone is having a crisis in a village and there's no law enforcement to take advantage of it. And if there is, sadly, and I hate to even speak this because it breaks my heart, but sometimes the law enforcement won't even come out to the home. Like if there's a violation of a protection order, they will just say, well, it's a he said, she said situation. How are we going to prove who did what? And they're not even enforcing the laws on the book, or that they have the ability to. So anyway, so it's in this context that the MMIW crisis has really reached an all-time high. But, I do believe that there is something to be optimistic about, and we will be talking about that more. So sorry for that long-winded explanation, but I think it's really important to understand that we're different than the rest of the lower 48 Indian tribes. Goodness, sheesh.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I was typing some like keywords and some of the things for you all. If this is again newer to you and this is a new context for you to navigate, I'm always learning from these folks, and we have a strong policy bench that often goes over my head. But I put some of I was typing away and putting some of those key things in the chat if that helps you read them and to follow up on them. But yes, it is such an important history to know about, and that very much informs where we are today, and that intersects many of the issues that we have. So I know that you gave that legal history. Do you want to share about the role that the Alaska Native Women Resource Center is taking to address this crisis in Alaska? And again, for the audience, there's so much here, as you can already tell. So there's going to be a lot of terminology. If you have questions about some of these, again, please ask. If there's acronyms we forget to define, please ask, but I'll also try to do that in the chat. So Michelle, if you want to share from the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center about any of the work you're doing, whether it's the Not Invisible Act, the alert systems, or anything like that, I'll let you elaborate on some of the key things you want folks to know about.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Just wanting to let folks know that most of the information I provide will be regarding the policy arm of the Alaska Native Women's Resource Center. We also have a technical assistance arm in which we have a advocacy academy that will be rolled out in the next couple of months. So please watch for that. And we provide technical assistance for grantees who have OVC, Office of Victims of Crime, Office of Violence Against Women, Family Violence Services Prevention Act. I think those are the acronyms that we're providing technical assistance on, and you can request that. But I'm going to focus on what we do in the policy arm. So we did create an MMIW, Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, an action plan for Alaska Native communities. And at the time that we created this, we were using the term MMIW, and there are a lot of acronyms that are being used right now, and I don't mean to disrespect any missing person, period. And so please know that I'm trying to be that whenever I say MMIW, it covers everyone who is in that situation, regardless of their sexual orientation, age, gender, that sort of thing. So I just want to make that clear. So this toolkit is intended to be a starting point for each Alaskan community to develop a plan of action before a tragic event occurs. It can also be used as a guide after a relative is feared missing or harmed to help organize the community. It is a collection of ideas, tasks, and recommendations of what can be done within a community aimed at supporting a family facing crisis and ways to respond in an organized way when one of our mothers, aunties, sisters, or children have gone missing or is found murdered. We base this toolkit on feedback received from tribes and families about the issues they encounter when there is an unexplained death or someone goes missing. We can help you put together a plan if your community is so inclined. Otherwise, if you want to, I'll drop in the link of where you can find the plan and look at that after my presentation. The next thing that we're working on right now is we're assisting with bringing information about the Federal Emergency Management Agency Integrated Public Alert and Warning System, or it's called IPAWS. This is an alert system offered by the Federal Emergency Management Agency and is available for free to any tribe, community, city, state, or county in the country. And some tribes are taking FEMA up on this and are introducing iPaws into their community. The system operates through the internet, cell phone, and radio, but because of limited connectivity in many of our Alaska rural communities, this system may not be fully available, but improvements and innovations are being put into place every week to increase accessibility, and in many areas, you do have the capacity to take advantage of this program. iPaws, once it is set up, allows for the community to put out an alert to residents in a defined area about a missing person. The alert can be a cell phone call or text or an announcement on the local TV or radio station. The emergency event is determined by the community, so your community could create a policy around this and have someone on their staff be the local point of contact. It can be about a missing child, a vulnerable adult, elder, or anyone under any situation determined by the protocols of the community. So the sooner we know that the sooner the community knows about a missing person, the sooner we all can deploy and look for that individual. And especially if it's a weather situation, that's just vital. So the only costs are the cost of a computer and maybe a little bit of software. And so it's pretty low expense, but high reward and return. And the Resource Center is available to help you if you're interested in exploring this further. We did a webinar last month, and we do have it on our website if you'd like to look at it just to get more information. And so we're really optimistic about that program. We're soon to launch a tribal court and legal advocacy team that will assist with providing resources among the regions across the state for victims needing legal services. We know that in many parts of our state, legal resources are so hard to come by and people do not know how to access it, despite there being some long-lived programs or organizations that provide this service. So we're going to work with deploying, having an advisory team working on trying to figure out in each region what the needs are and what is available, and putting together some small subgrants to help with that sort of representation for people experiencing gender-based violence. Another thing, we have a monthly call the first Friday of the month to address MMIP issues and talk about policy issues. It's during these calls, and we have one tomorrow at 11 a.m. in which I try to update everyone on what is going on the federal level. My colleague, Deborah O'Gara, who you heard from, and Deborah, that was a wonderful presentation. It provides the state updates, and then all of you who participate provide us with what's going on in your region and what sort of needs might be present. We have some national initiatives that we're involved in. The Not Invisible Act, just today, Secretary Holland named the Not Invisible Act Commission after almost 2 years of it being enacted. And you're going to have 3 Alaska Native folks on that committee. And so it's with such a great honor that I'm very humbled that I get to be one of the tribal court judges that will be on this commission. Tammy Giroux, our executive director, will be on the commission, and Vivian Corthan from Bethel area will be on it as well. So watch out for field meetings that we will be having conducted and other information regarding that. But it is a multi-agency effort that will include law enforcement, tribal leaders, federal partners, service providers, and most importantly, survivors. The commission will make recommendations to the Department of Interior and the Department of Justice to improve intergovernmental coordination and establish best practices to ensure that Indigenous people don't continue to go missing and are not murdered at disproportionate rates. So we are tasked to work for 18 months and will provide recommendations for addressing violence in and around our communities. So the other thing that we do is we at the Resource Center, we provide testimony and assist with consultation comments on any issues related to MMIP, gender-based violence. So if you get a Dear Tribal Leader letter or you have an issue in your community, take it up to your tribal leaders and reach out to us, and we will help with those comments. We have a lot of great information and resources available. So I hope that you will consider maybe signing up for our email at our ANWRC.org website and learn about other services that we have available. So Gunishish Akpik.
I was just trying to type it, but I'm so excited. Thank you so much for that new update. Congratulations. And just we lift our hands to the 3 Alaska reps who I know are going to do an amazing job serving our communities and representing us on that commission. I know it's been long awaited and we've been wondering who's going to be on it. And I know that there's a lot of advocacy to make sure that Alaska had good representation on that commission. And again, like Michelle mentioned, one of the unique pieces about the Not Invisible Act is having survivors also serve on that. And that's unfortunately very different than how normally the commissions include folks. So I'm really excited to see the updates and have that come out. And thank you in advance for your service on that. I know that it'll be meaningful. Again, there's some things being put in the chat. Feel free to check out those links. And that weekly call that Michelle was mentioning, I know is super welcoming. So please feel free to join those. That's how I met Michelle. And we created direct actions from it. And again, really created lots of partnerships from folks coming together. And we encourage you all to do the same. Alex from the Alaska Native Justice Center, you also have a legal background and the Justice Center also does so much. Do you mind sharing a little bit from Alaska Native Justice Center on how you all are supporting Alaska Native tribes and some of the other pieces being worked on from your org?
Sure, thanks so much, Akpik and Michelle, for that Cliff Notes legal history that covered 100 years in just a few short minutes. For those of us that do this work, we know that it took so much time, effort, and resources from tribes and tribal leaders to kind of sketch out the edges and fight for the jurisdiction that Alaska tribes do have. You know, the federal response for PL 280 or the state response to PL 280. You know, we thankfully had the Alaska Supreme Court clarify that Alaska tribes don't need jurisdiction or don't need land in order to have jurisdiction. And again, that's pretty unique in the field of Indian law. And part of what is so exciting about VAWA 2022 that we'll talk about is we had a very clear reaffirmation about that jurisdiction that tribes have regardless of our land status here. I'll talk a bit about the 2 kind of spheres that ANJC provides services. I'll start with tribes, and then I'll sketch out a little bit about what we do to support victims and survivors. I know that you'll hear more this afternoon from our team on that. But as it relates to tribal justice, ANJC has been providing training and technical assistance to tribes throughout the state the last few years. And when we talk about technical assistance, I think we have a different understanding than perhaps the federal government does when we talk about technical assistance. We have a team of tribal justice facilitators here that answer phone calls from tribal courts throughout the state and help support them in identifying issues or responding to community concerns that walk in the front door of the tribal court on a daily basis. And as far as training, we do something similar. Just last week, our team was rolling out a 3-day domestic violence training that focused on a model tribal law that we developed in partnership with some folks from ANWRC. Each one of our model tribal laws goes through a roundtable process with us and our partners to develop the best possible product as a place to start for tribes who are looking at adopting new laws. We think that that's a promising practice. We've also partnered with UAF and some of their trainings in the tribal management program to try and get the word out, because as tribal leaders, many of you know this, you probably know as much about the legal landscape as or more than most lawyers, right? You have learned by doing and are learning, continuing to learn. And so anything that we can do to help get the word out through and with our partners is something that we enjoy doing. I do want to talk also about some services that ANJC provides, not specifically related to tribal justice, but I think that they do kind of complement each other. So ANJC represents tribes in ICWA cases in state court, or in child in need of aid cases that implicate the Indian Child Welfare Act. And I put our tagline in there because I think that it's really important to recognize, and it describes it in a way that everybody can kind of feel. So child in need of aid cases that involve Indian children in state courts, every party gets a lawyer appointed, right? The mom gets an attorney, dad gets an attorney, the state gets an attorney, sometimes the child gets an attorney. The tribe is the only party that is not appointed an attorney. If they need an attorney, they're expected to bring one at their own expense. So for the last 3 years, we've had a team of lawyers and paralegals that are representing tribes in those cases. In state court, we are not statewide with that service. Unlike our other tribal justice work, we are limited to cases in state court in the South Central region. And we've pushed that from Palmer down to Homer. So we've got a few different courthouses that our lawyers are in. But I do want to make very clear that this is a service that is available to any Alaska tribe. You don't need to be a tribe in that location. So we know that all 229 tribes have children that are caught up in the child welfare system within this region. And so where the tribe is does not matter in whether or not we can help. It's where the case is being heard that matters. And as you heard earlier today, these connections between child welfare and being removed from home, being homeless or being trafficked are all things that are connected. And so as I put in the chat, we believe that ICWA is the gold standard, right? In that children who are removed from their home should all have active efforts to reunify those families, and removal, while sometimes necessary, should be short, if at all possible, and that children placed with extended family under the Indian Child Welfare Act preferences are going to do better than children who are not. And we're seeing some promising results. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I know that in our cases, children are more likely to be placed within those ICWA preferences than statewide average, and certainly an Anchorage average. So we're trying to measure our results with some of those data points. So that's me talking a lot. I think I answered the question.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to pull out for folks who are listening how much that support means to that ANJC provides, that legal scaffolding and support for tribes to be able to, again, strengthen the systems and how important that is, and how much that makes a difference in our community's capacity to have a local response, right? So these things that may feel distant or behind the scenes or confusing legally, they directly feed into our ability to respond, right? And that's so essential. And these are really important pieces that our partners are holding, that strengthen our communities, that strengthen our tribes, that strengthen our sovereignty and our ability to self-determine how and what we do in response. I get all worked up, clearly, but this is I mean, it's just really powerful work that's being done that, again, I wanted to highlight. The other thing that you and I have talked so much about in the past was around data. And I know that you've served on a Justice Commission that helps put together some of the information that's needed and then used on this issue. And we've been talking a little bit about, because we were concerned it was going to be sunsetting. Do you mind sharing a little bit about that? Because again, it's a resource that I have found really useful, but often, again, I didn't even know it existed. And so would you mind plugging that a little bit?
Sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So I serve on the Alaska Criminal Justice Commission, which is a commission that was created by statute, actually created and signed by Governor Parnell several administrations ago. And it has representatives from each of the principal agencies, right? So the heads of each of the state agencies, Department of Public Safety, Department of Corrections, and each one of those sits at the table. There is a seat for an Alaska Native voice at the table, and ANJC has filled that seat. In addition to the discussion around policy issues as they relate to criminal justice and Alaska Native people, the enabling statute that set up the Criminal Justice Commission also directs two agencies in particular, Department of Corrections and Department of Public Safety, to share information with each other. And that information allows us to have snapshots of how many people are incarcerated. We have the data that very clearly shows that Alaska Native people are disproportionately incarcerated and in prison in Alaska. We also have, through a series of statewide listening sessions that was done about 5 years ago, we have a powerful body of anecdotal and personal information from people throughout Alaska, talking about the impact of violent crime upon them, as well as upon their families. So we know that when we talk about data, one, it's very important that it be good data, but also the data often misses so much. It misses the broad impact upon families and on communities. So we can't lose sight of that when we're looking also just for numbers. The Criminal Justice Commission also, for the last 2 years, for the first time ever, has been tracking data and publishing data from the Department of Law, which shows charging decisions and charging decisions that are or are not made in sexual assault cases. So what we know now is that less than half, or just about half of the cases that make it to a district attorney or the Department of Law for a charging decision, half of those are result in a charge, in a criminal charge. And that is important information. One, it's not surprising for those of us in the community that know these issues, but we do now have numbers to point to, right? It's not just our voices. And I don't mean just to discount it. I mean, our voices are powerful, but the numbers are important to tell the story in a different way. And if you add what we know about charging decisions on top of what we already know, that so few people report, that so few reports are processed through law enforcement and actually make it to a charging decision, the picture becomes more clear. And the picture is, what we talked about at the beginning, that Alaska Native people, particularly Alaska Native women, are disproportionately at risk for violence and sexual violence, and that are the systems that are here to serve us can do much, much better. What I would share is that there is a bill that is pending in the Alaska legislature that would stop the sunset of the Alaska Criminal Justice Commission. I'm looking that number up right now. I don't have it. There it is, HB 183 is pending, and it would allow the data collection function of the Criminal Justice Commission to live on so that we continue to have good information. And I know it may seem weird to be excited about data and about policy, but this data collection, information collection is important. It helps us make the case for what's going on in our communities, and it also helps inform policymakers when we're working with them about changes that we want.
Yeah, thank you so much. Again, I was excited about it. And again, we heard presentations on data earlier, but we know that it is so important. And I want to bring back that quote to pair with what you said. Data is a tool to enhance intuition from the previous presentation, right? And I think that you're speaking to the same thing, that we have intuition, we know what's happening. We hear families all the time who are talking about lack of prosecution. And then this is where we can have that information through that Criminal Justice Commission that's showing the lack of charging that's happening, right? So then the things that we're hearing from our families and one another, we can point to and say, hey, this is what is happening. And if that commission sunsets, then there won't be required reporting of this information, right? So these are all critical areas that oftentimes, if we're in policy or law and we are having a hard time understanding how does this translate into impact, that's the connection there. And again, I'm thankful for all of you sharing. The last thing before I have some questions also, because I'm naturally just going into what Kendra will share a little bit about too. I think we're gonna also, can we talk about VAWA 2022 and what it means for Alaska tribes? There's some pilot projects and there's some unique pieces that I think Michelle briefly said, but did you want to add anything to that, Alex?
Sure, I'll just hit what I think are the high points. It is, and the high points are this. This was almost a 20-year effort of attempts at federal legislation. Again, tribal leaders and advocates did not give up. I've lost track of the number of attempts of federal bills. I'll just speak for myself. I'm a newcomer to this particular part of the work in trying to get the Alaska Public Safety Tribal Empowerment. And I've only been working on it for 5 years, right? And so there are people who have been working on it for much, much longer than that. There's in my mind, there are two important Alaska specific provisions, and I'm just going to focus on those two. The first is the section that I referenced earlier that reaffirms what we all know to be true, that tribes in Alaska have civil and criminal jurisdiction over Indians, over Native people within a village. And we now have a legal description of a land base, right, of what a village is. And a village is tied to a definition in ANJC, right? So this is Alaska specific response. There was so much resistance and concern about creating Indian country in Alaska. And this was a real, I think it was a very creative Alaska specific way to give and recognize that land, that territorial jurisdiction component to sovereignty that we have been missing. And the second part of it that's specific to Alaska is what Michelle referenced earlier. It's the pilot project, right? Alaska tribes were shut out of this opportunity to have this pathway to exercising criminal jurisdiction over non-Native people that commit violence in our communities. Supreme Court decision a long time ago, Oliphant said, actually, tribes, you don't have the right to hold non-Native people accountable for committing violence in their communities. We don't trust you to do that. But Congress could change it if they wanted to. So it took Congress a few years, but they have changed it and are beginning to change it. There's also an expanded list of the types of violent crimes that are recognized under the pilot project, but I won't get too much into the weeds. In my mind, those are the two big takeaways that I'm very excited about.
Thank you. Again, translating those pieces, like with VAWA passing, why is this important? What are the impacts? What it's going to happen? You know, how does this end up looking like in our communities and for our people? And those are really important updates to know about for you all to take back to your communities. Also, I get really worked up, but you know, I envision our tribal justice system changing, and it begins with folks like you. And I hope that this inspires like more Indigenous lawyers and paralegals and policy folks and legislators. So I get really excited because I can see how important it is to have folks like you in our systems doing this work, advocating, learning that language and translating for us. We naturally started talking about how the information from the Criminal Justice Commission can be put into things like legislation. And I wanted to welcome Kendra, who has an amazing and strong policy background and has been doing a lot of work at the state level, to share a little bit about intersections of public safety legislation that's happening so much. And I'll help ask some more questions too, but I'll just start you off there and see what you want to share with folks to make that connection.
Sounds good. I'm going to focus a little bit more, since we talked a lot of federal, a little bit more on the state. So as I mentioned before, I work for Native Peoples Action and Native Peoples Action Community Fund. And then I also sit on the newly formed MMIP Council that was just recently created. We've just had 2 meetings now. But one of the really important pieces about my work at NPA is we're hearing about all these different commissions. We're talking about people that are making these decisions and making sure that our Alaska Native people are at these decision-making tables, whether it's boards or commissions, different councils that are created, legislators. We need to be in that space. We need to be at that table and raising these issues. I've had a number of years in policy, 10 years in the Alaska legislature, before that sometime on the federal side. And so just kind of being part of that sausage making process. And we also need people in the background, that like staff members that are able to speak up and be in these rooms. They're also very important and can help push a number of issues. A couple comments that I just wanted to add. We're thinking about, policies. We're talking about the Non-Visible Act and VAWA. There's a number of pieces of legislation on the state side that are also really important, and responsibilities that really fall to the state to be ensuring that we are protecting people. And that comes into, I'm going to start with public safety. All of this is really created. It's up to the state to be providing public safety for people across Alaska. And what many of you may have heard is only 1 in 3 villages have a VPSO. So you have no public safety officer in our communities. And so when a crime is committed, it can take hours to days to be able to get someone there. So part of our work at the MMIWG working group is to be advocating for increased public safety for VPSOs. I'm happy to report that today, actually, while we've been on this call, the House just passed Senate Bill 81, which was the VPSO bill that has been going through the legislature for a few years now, but it came together by a working group of VPSOs from people across the communities and talking about what really needs to be fixed. So that just passed the House, and we'll be going over just for some concurrence over in the Senate. But that is a huge piece for Alaska and really important. The other piece that we're talking a lot about with the governor's office is an updated 911 system. Why is this important? For example, in most of our communities across Alaska, if you're going to call 911, the dispatcher that's going to pick up is probably in another area, could be in an urban area. They can't track to where you are, or in some cases that they can't even see who the caller is or the phone number. So if the call were to drop, they can't call you back. They can't pinpoint where you are. So we are having a number of meetings just to talk about how are we going to update that system to ensure that we have an adequate system. It's 30 years behind, and we are one of 3 states that do not have a good 911 system. So that's just part of our overall goals of what we can do to increase public safety. And a piece of that, which I won't go down this rabbit hole too much, but we heard Michelle talk about, IPAWS and what do we need for 911? It comes back to some basic things of broadband and internet connection. And so we are seeing funds coming in from the federal level. And so what we're also doing is having meetings to say, where is that funding going and how is it being spent? Because that's incredibly important. We don't want the funding just to go to urban centers or just to, we need connectivity all throughout Alaska. And so that's what we're really advocating for, is connectivity into the areas also that are not connected, and to make these types of services available, where I know where some people are paying $350 a month to have really terrible internet. So we need to ensure that when we're providing connectivity, it's going to be the same across the entire state. So then we can also tap into these systems like a better 911 system, like iPods. And there's also a suicide prevention line. All of this is going to need the infrastructure base. So there's so many pieces that are interconnected. And I will stop there to see what other questions you have, because I will keep going.
I know we could talk about this all day, but those are such important pieces. And folks who are on the call, from our rural communities that having 911 is something that's just so simple, but we don't have. And so again, I uplift these partners who are putting those pieces together, intersecting things like 911 systems, the alert systems, and the suicide prevention lines as all critical things that we need. I know that they aren't available, but I think if you wouldn't mind sharing about ANWRC and the new position, some of those important representatives that are doing some work that we're looking forward to working with. And I know that there's a recent proclamation that maybe we can also share about too. Kendra?
Sure, since you ended with this one, I will say the proclamation that we worked on as a working group and sent over to the governor's office is establishing today, May 5th, as MMIP Awareness Day. So happy that was done, and so appreciative of our working group doing that together. Some other things that in the kind of public safety realm and MMIP realm that have been done recently, as mentioned, is the MMIP Council that was created by administrative order. This working group has also been advocating, since we've started it for 4 years now, to have really specific positions that are MMIWG, MMIP related, and that's looking at investigators and looking at cold case units. And so one of the most recent things has been the hiring of a former Alaska State Trooper, Ann Sears, to lead the department's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Initiative. And this is just an incredibly great step forward. I've had a chance to meet Ann. She's been joining us on our MMIP council meetings. And so to have someone directly within DPS, she's Alaska Native, and she was spent maybe 20 plus years, I can't remember exactly, within the troopers. So she's got a lot of knowledge and bringing that directly to the department. In addition, we're having additional positions, one within the missing persons clearinghouse that was included in the budget, and additional tribal liaison positions are something that we've been asking for a number of years. VPSO funding has been cut year after year. So finally in this budget, it's not passed yet, but in the budget is increased funding for VPSOs so we can get some additional VPSOs across our communities. But as part of these efforts too, we have to continue to advocate to increase that funding because it's still not adequate. We need to look at things to support our VPSOs, and that's going to include housing. What is it? You know, some really basic needs to be able to support people. So we're continuing to talk to legislators to talk about that and bring this up, like I said, in all these different spaces that we sit in, you know, whether it be boards and commissions, because these councils are important to be uplifting that work as well and being another voice. So hopefully that answered your question. I'll stop there again.
Everyone's getting a taste of what our Tuesday meetings look like. Is that really we try to cover all of this and then collectively make decisions about who's on what is our shared strategy, what are their perspectives, you know. So I wanted to, as Kendra did, uplift Ann Sears, who had actually retired and came back to serve our community. So I just want to uplift our leaders who do things like that, and how powerful it is to have Alaska Native leaders in these positions. That also reminds me to uplift, we have from federal initiatives, we have a local coordinator named Ingrid Cumberledge. She holds many events and coordinates a lot of work happening here in the state, including folks in law enforcement. And again, we can't cover everything in this day. We can't fix it all in one day, but I do want to uplift our sister Ingrid Cumberledge, who is also doing really important work across the state and has been hosting some of the listening sessions regionally. I believe Manilik today is doing theirs today. We've had them happen in other regions, including the Bering Strait, South Central, the Interior, TCC. And again, just trying to acknowledge all the good work and the leadership, and thankful for the partnerships, and that folks like Kendra are working on some of these commissions and boards, and sharing back that information. That's the other thing. You know, Kendra does a fabulous job going to this MMIP commission and then immediately letting us know what is on the agenda, what is public, where can we find it. And so again, we want to share these out with you all who are on this call today and recording it. I think that we covered a lot in this panel. And again, I know we may have gone through it quickly, but it's recorded, and please reach out to us. Our information has been put in the chat so that we can, sorry for the banging. So we can answer questions.
Can I add on one other thing? I just wanted to mention that I know we talk a lot about the different spaces that we're serving in, and there's many opportunities for the public, for community members to step up into these positions as well. But in addition, there's always time on our agendas for public comment. And so I also really want to encourage that is we need to all be hearing from the public. And so there's public opportunity to speak. You know, we try to share out the information on when the councils, all these different councils and commissions are meeting. So following our MMIWG2S working group Facebook page is going to be a good spot to find that information. So you have an opportunity to call in and share. Some of these commissions also bring on public members in certain spaces we have like subcommittees that are meeting from the commission, and we bring in additional public members to serve in those spaces. And then lastly, we have been working to try to get additional legislation pushed through. There are 2 bills in the state legislature. They have not had a hearing as of yet, but that's something that we continue to advocate for. Is we have a long list, which we're happy to share sometime, of things that this working group have put together, not just with our brains together, but really from what we have learned from the families, from people that have gone through this and have shared that information, have been trying to push, legislation through. And so that's also spaces where you can get involved, is, contacting your legislator, pushing for things that might need to be included in the budget, just calling them, talking with them, telling that you support. Your voice is so incredibly important. And spending, as I mentioned, I spent a number of years as a staff member there, is when our constituents would call in, that was something that, legislators, they do listen, they're there to represent you. So I just want to say you all have an opportunity to be using your voice, and no matter what you're doing, I know we are all crazy busy and wearing lots of hats and grandmas and aunties and taking care of kiddos and dads, but there's so much that we can do together. So